we're ready. Shall we stand for the pledge, please? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
President Daly?
Here.
Vice President Headland?
Here.
Trustee Clements is not able to join us tonight. Trustee McNall?
Here.
Trustee Parr?
Here.
Thank you. So I'll just start by letting everyone know that the board joined Mr. Tim Walsh on a walkthrough of the facilities tonight before our meeting, which is something we do every year, but it was certainly more interesting this year, given all of the preparations that Mr. Walsh and his team have done to make sure our facilities are safe for our students and staff. It's really incredibly impressive. I wish everybody could see it. Obviously, our staff and students have seen it, but I wish all of our parents could see it too, because it is, it just really resonates. It makes you just feel super comfortable. So thank you to Mr. Walsh for taking us through, and also, there's great beautification that's happened outside of our buildings, which I do hope people have also seen. The playground, the paving, it's fantastic. So thank you for that. And our next Board of Education meeting will be held on October 6th at 7 p.m. right here in the gym. So for those of you at home who are watching, we are now in the auditorium for the foreseeable in our new setup that we're trying out tonight. So you're welcome to join us here. And the doors to go through are the main doors. And that's it. I'll turn it over to Dr. Benante.
Thanks, Jen. And I'd just like to echo your comments and thank Tim and his team. As you heard tonight, there was a lot that went into the opening of our schools, and there's a lot of, for lack of a better term, behind-the-scenes work that was done to ensure that our facilities were running as safely as they could be. And with that, as John was asking about the ventilation system, there were a lot of questions regarding our ventilation. That became a prominent topic in the reopening of schools. And Tim worked diligently to make sure that our ventilation system was operating at its most optimal capacity, which at times included getting an independent perspective on how the system was operating, and you heard a little bit about that during our walkthrough. And then I think you saw the level of detail that went into, classroom arrangements, hand sanitation station setup, signage throughout our buildings. So I know it was a team effort. And anytime you have facilities work going on in the summer, when you have any bond work that's going on, it's a busy enough summer in and of itself when you're working with contractors coming on and off campus and monitoring the progress of that work, because there's a hard deadline. You want that work to be completed by the end of the school, or by the beginning of the school year, excuse me. And then add on top of that now the preparations that we were doing to make sure that the physical campus was as safe as it could be for students and for staff. So kudos to Tim and his team for their work. I think we're on our 8th day of school. For many school districts, this was their first week of opening. I'm glad it was not for us. I feel like, that's old news. But our 8th day of school, our second full day today, and I can say that everything continues to go, I think, as smoothly as can be on campus. Our students and their families and our staff have adapted to new routines and procedures. We had some anxiety about arrival and dismissal. That appears to be going quite smoothly. Our families are being very diligent about filling out the health form each day, which is very helpful to us. And as we walk around our buildings, there's teaching and learning occurring for our students, both who are on campus and those who are with us remotely. So I couldn't be more impressed with the opening of school, and really pleased with the growth mindset that our staff has demonstrated as well, and that translates to our kids. And it's been a really just great to have students back on campus for the last 2.5 weeks or so now. So, and I hope to continue to have positive news to report about that. One thing you may have read about, because it's quite prominent, it has been prominent in the news, is our requirement to report to the state any COVID-related illnesses that have occurred on campus or in our schools. We are doing that. We are participating in that daily. The portal that this information is supposed to be displayed on does not appear to be yet open. So I would pull it up and show you, but I haven't found it yet. I know we're reporting information every day. I don't quite see where that's landing, but the spirit of it is so families and other community members could log on and see what's going on in their school district. I do think our regular communication protocols, if we were having any incidents or issues, we would be communicating that to families and to the community anyway. But we'll go ahead and provide this information to the state. I was on a conference call with the State Department of Health last week with regards to this, and I understood the position the State Department of Health was taking, which was in order to paint a complete picture of what spread is in a community, it's helpful to have information coming in from a variety of sources. So one would be the local Department of Health, the others may be our schools. But there's I get the logic there, but it's not completely, it's not as straightforward as that. I would say any information that we're reporting is as good as the information that's coming into us. So we're not doing our own testing here on campus. So if we were, I think it'd be a different story. But we would merely be reporting what is shared with us. So I don't know if this next step really will go as far as providing that fuller picture that the Department of Health at the state level is looking for until we have some sort of testing program or testings at a point where we could do it routinely with students and with staff and any other individual who are coming onto campus each day. So those are just my observations. For now, we'll certainly comply with the requests. But my hope is that our testing capabilities, really everywhere, can be expanded to the point where we can implement testing for students. Interestingly, there seems to be knowledge of a few districts that are implementing testing programs for their students, none locally that we're aware of. I've asked, no one in our region appears to be, but I would like to know, and I've expressed this to the Department of Health, where that's occurring, because I think we could perhaps learn something from those school districts and the partnerships I'm assuming that they must have in order to implement a testing program. So more to come on that, obviously, in the days ahead. There was some criticism of the initial request. We were notified, just for your knowledge, 12:30 of the reporting requirement, and the first data were due, or set of data were due, at 3 o'clock that day. And there was a conference call somewhere in between to explain what we were required to do. So that's just kind of how it's been going. And this was one more thing, but I think we have a good routine now established for reporting the information that does become available to us. Another area of development that I just wanted to share with the board tonight, a little more detail, was with respect to athletics. And Jen and I, we'll just scoot to the side here so Cecilia can see the screen. So as I mentioned during our last meeting, New York State Public High School Athletic Association had indicated that high school athletics could begin on September 21st. However, our sections, we're part of Section 1, which is the governing body for us and for other school districts in our region, had the ability to delay the start date for our students. And Section 1 did delay the start of the fall sports season to September 29th, so just about a week later. And part of this, part of the reason for the delay was the request of many superintendents who were not yet starting school or having students on their campus, until October. So this is closer to that start date. And I just want to pull out some documents in my bag here. So as a basis of the guidance we've received from NIPSFA, which is the state agency, are two guidance documents from the Department of Health, these two guidance documents, which we worked with some time, which are the guidance that's been provided to us for the opening of our schools. which we used extensively in preparation for the start of the school year, as well as the guidance that was provided to entities for sports and recreation in August. So youth sports leagues all the way through now schools. So it's the intersection of these two documents that have resulted in the guidance for athletics for the fall. And in some ways, these documents are consistent, and in other ways, they're not. So that's part of what we have to figure out now in how we prepare for fall sports in just a few weeks. Just for your knowledge, sports have been classified as either low, moderate, or high risk. And the restrictions are on each individual sport is dependent upon what category that sport falls into. So an individual sport like cross country is considered low risk, whereas a high contact sport like football is considered high risk. So again, the guidelines somewhat vary depending on the sport. And interestingly, a new development, though, in response to that was given that football and volleyball were considered high risk for different reasons. Football, high risk, given the high contact nature of the sport. Volleyball, because it's an indoor activity in the fall. NIPSFA created a second fall season, and if you're not confused enough, that will take place in the late winter or early spring. But it's being referred to as Fall Season 2 for those sports to now compete in. So football and volleyball will not be competing in the fall. They will hopefully be competing in the late winter, early spring as part of Fall Season 2. And we're still awaiting a decision at the sectional level regarding modified sports. So we're set to begin junior varsity and varsity sports on September 29th, but we're still awaiting word on the start of modified sports. Usually modified sports, regardless, begin a few weeks after the start of the varsity sports season, but the section may impose further limitations to modified sports out of consideration for the space needs. Obviously, if our kids are practicing, there's more space requirements now. Also, just given the volume of what any individual district can manage. With the opening of school, now the opening of athletics, and perhaps limiting the scope of athletics to enable school districts to focus on, I would say, prioritizing certain groups of athletes. The other piece about modified sports is many kids who are involved in modified sports are still of age where town or rec programs are operating, whereas those who are competing on, and this is a generalization, those who are competing at the JV or varsity level are no longer participating in town or recreational or travel settings. So that's one of the considerations I know as well that's being factored into a decision regarding modified. So this is just a broad outline of how our seasons will lay out. We still don't have an end date for the fall, but there will be an end date sometime before November 30th. Each season, as you'll note, has been delayed from its usual starting time. So we're prepared to have our cross-country team, our soccer team, and our tennis team practice and compete beginning September 29th. The winter season will begin on November 30th. Again, that's a few weeks later than when it traditionally does begin. And for us, that's basketball, indoor track, and hockey. Hockey's through a merger. Fall season 2 will begin in early March, again with an end date to be determined. That will be football and volleyball. And then our spring sports will begin in mid-April and go through some period towards the end of the year. Baseball, softball, track and field, lacrosse, and golf. The postseason competition is inclusive of the potential for sectional play, but ending at that point. There are no state championships. There's no regional competition this year, as NIPSFA made that determination already.
Can I have a question?
Yep.
So the fall sports season 2,
Yes.
those kids that are now going to be playing football and volleyball, does that mean they're not going to be able to play baseball and softball?
No, it actually means they can, which is unique. So that season will be abbreviated to allow for student athletes who are competing in it to also compete in spring sports as well.
So they're definitely going to end it before the spring
Correct.
sport.
There may be, Margaret, and this is where the postseason competition comes into play, even though it'll be a modified postseason schedule. There may be slight overlap in the end of one season and the beginning of the other, but that's not unique for us. It's not uncommon for fall sports to go into the winter sports season, maybe overlap by a week.
Right, but are we going to have enough kids
Yeah.
to field a team for both of
For
those
competition, yes. For practice at the start of the season, that's where we may see limited participation in practice because one team may be wrapping up football or volleyball, for example, while baseball or lacrosse or softball are beginning. But you could actually have the potential of a student playing 4 sports in high school, which is unheard of. To have a 3-sport athlete is pretty unique. You could actually have a 4-sport athlete this year. That would allow for that. Okay. And now the considerations are extensive, and I had to make a decision here on how long I wanted this presentation to be because I think we'll be talking about athletics a few more times as we prepare for the season. But this is really where our work now lay. We know that we're going to have sports practices beginning September 29th, and we know we're going to come to a point of competition a few weeks thereafter. And there's a lot that has to be taken in consideration. I would say no different than when we're opening a school, now opening up our athletic fields to competition. So just a few: social distancing, also during practice and also during, to the extent that it can be during competition. It's not possible in some sports. But the use of face coverings is now getting a lot of attention. And this is where the guidelines are somewhat conflictive. In order to operate our schools, face coverings are required, as long as unless you are 6 feet apart. During competition, guidelines state face coverings are required unless a student athlete is uncomfortable wearing a face covering. And I've seen this play out in youth sports all summer long, where the kids start with their face covering on, and then by the end of the 5th minute of play, they all have them off. So I do believe that this is something that we're going to encounter here, where our soccer, I'll use as an example, may begin the game with face coverings, but as soon as the student athlete becomes uncomfortable, the guidelines allow for the student athlete to take the face covering off during competition. So, these are, again, some of the particulars that we're going to have to work through as the seasons begin. Screenings. So in order to operate your school, you're required to have a screening. In order to operate sports and recreation, the guidance says screening's encouraged, but you cannot require anybody to participate to complete a screening. So again, a bit of an inconsistency there. And NIPSFA will acknowledge we're using these 2 guidance documents to provide our guidance, and there are areas where these respective guidance documents are contradictory. So screenings are a potential area for where we may encounter an issue, and we have to have plans for that. Spectators are limited under the sports and recreation guidance to no more than 2 spectators per student athlete. So that's a significant shift for us, considering how athletics have operated in the past. So we have to come up with some parameters for that, make sure our student athletes are aware of that and that we're monitoring that. One thing that has also been discussed at the sectional level is, again, because you can imagine now there's a front of house operation that we have to be prepared to operate, screenings maybe, but also spectators coming in, is to limit spectators to only those for the home team. So if Haldane's competing at Haldane spectators would be allowed, no more than 2 per student athlete. But when Haldane travels to Tuckahoe or travels to Pauling, spectators would be limited only to Tuckahoe spectators and Pauling spectators, again, to limit the amount of that any one district will have to go through, and given whatever their capacity is to go through, to monitoring spectators during that time. So that may be very much a limitation that we have in place. No final decision made there yet, but I think that's certainly been something that we've discussed. We have some issues with locker rooms. We definitely have issues with locker rooms here because we're supposed to maintain social distancing inside of a locker room. Our locker rooms are quite small. So you can imagine the preparation that goes into changing and whatnot for the start of practice or for the start of competition. That's going to be drawn out over a longer period of time, both for us and potentially for any visiting team. So we have to account for that. Transportation, no different than when we're operating our buses. Each day to bring students to school, we have the same limitations on how many students we can transport per bus to an away event. So there could be a budget implication there. And then cleaning and disinfection, both before and after events. So those are the broad areas of consideration that we're now thinking about and planning for, as are other school districts. And as we go to make decisions, we obviously will focus on communicating this to our families and to our student athletes. You'll note Mr. Goddard, our interim AD, is not here tonight. He is at the Blue Devil Booster Club meeting this evening, sharing similar information with them. We want to make sure all of our stakeholders are fully aware that while we're excited to have athletics, it's going to happen in more of a contained environment than what we were used to in the past. And I would say that probably most anybody who's been competing this summer in youth leagues is probably very different than what they've experienced there. Just having experienced that myself locally as a parent, I see what's being monitored in our youth leagues, and I do think our schools will be implementing a much higher standard than that which many of our youth leagues have implemented. And that's I think should be understood. We're an educational institution first and foremost, and then we athletics and extracurriculars are an extension of who we are as an educational institution, unlike other youth leagues in the area where that's their sole purpose. So some things to come, certainly. And but I feel good about where we are, and I feel good that our students will have the opportunity, hopefully, as all things staying the same, we'll be able to compete and be able to compete in a safe manner as possible. With this, I think that was my last little piece for tonight. And if there's any questions, I wanted to take a few minutes to answer them as best I could.
I just, not sort of specific questions, but just general areas, and it can be for you or any of the administration to touch on as they go through. One is, I'd love to hear how virtual students, how that's working. We were walking through the tour, and I was noticing, how few desks are in some of the, and I was like, some of these students are at home. So I immediately forgot about it. I'd love to hear how that's happening at different levels from anybody, anecdotally. Just an update on tech, because I know that jetpacks and tech and all that sort of stuff, and if that's working, it seems that everybody's good to go. And just very tactically, I had my kids come home today and said, hey, we took NWEAs. And I'm like, how does that work for virtual? So, and like somebody can check off on that.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Questions?
I just wanted to, and maybe it's a comment about the all of the athletics considerations that you were just discussing. It feels like it's a very similar process to the reopening that we just went through, where there is guidance, there are regulations, but then it is up to the district about how to best facilitate those and to what level we want to go to them. So face masks, for example, the state says, you have to wear them if you're not 6 feet apart. But Haldane has decided, let's just have everybody wear them anyways with face mask breaks, right? So we made a judgment call based on the regulation, but it was really up to us our comfort level. And it feels like that's a similar situation with athletics. There's going to be guidance it's somewhat confusing, somewhat inconsistent, but at the end of the day, it's still up to Haldane how we want to approach it and how strict we want to be with it.
Correct.
Yeah.
We have the option to always implement a higher standard,
Right.
not a lower one,
Yeah.
based on the guidance that's being
Yeah.
provided to us. So no different than setting the start of the sports season.
Right.
NIPSFA will first establish a standard. The section can implement a higher standard, for lack of a better term. They delayed it. We could individually as a school decide not to participate at all. We always reserve that right. So the minimum standards are set by NIPSFA and the section, and then the school district can implement a higher standard. I would say generally, with athletics in particular, because we're talking about inter-school competition, it becomes very important to make sure that we're clear on what areas we're going to be totally consistent with and what areas we're agreeing that there may be some, it may be discrepant. As a first step for this, both Mr. Goddard and I are meeting together with all of the other athletic directors and superintendents virtually in the Putnam Northern Westchester region to begin this conversation. I know health screenings is on that agenda. First, that's one of the topics. Face masks are on that agenda, and there's one other topic that I know we want to make sure we hit on for that first meeting. Now, the issue is we are part of Section 1, but Section 1 spans far greater area than just Putnam, Northern Westchester, BOCES. So we're talking about districts all the way down, Lower Westchester, all the way up through Dutchess. So Pauling, as an example, is a Dutchess school. They're not part of P&W BOCES. But we figure that's a good first step. Let's see where we get in that conversation, and then we'll go from there. But the face mask one is just one I've seen play out with my own kids through the summer, and it's a really tough standard to implement when kids are running up and down a soccer field. And maybe I should use cross country as the example because it's a fall sport. To maintain being masked, even as I struggle with it when I'm talking a lot. That's why I always take the mask off during these meetings. Because it becomes difficult to breathe. So, I think our student athletes have a perspective on that as well. So, our parents need to, we feel a responsibility, I know Dave would say this, to communicate to our families that if your son or daughter is going to participate, there's going to be inherent risk in participating in athletics. We can't eliminate all risk. We can mitigate it and are prepared to in these ways. But by way of this, the fact that soccer isn't high contact is also funny to me, because if you watch a soccer match or a lacrosse match, right, there's a lot of engagement. It's very physical, and you just have to understand that. And the primary emphasis has to be making sure sick people don't come into competition or come into our school building. I'll still fall back on that we're only competing when the transmission rate is very low, which it continues to be in our region. So those are some of the primary factors we should be looking to that don't necessarily have anything to do with what is occurring on the field of play. But yes, Jen, not to be long-winded about your point, we always reserve the right to implement our own practices and procedures at Haldane. I do think when it comes to interscholastic athletics, we want those to be as consistent as they can be with what our kids are experiencing elsewhere as well. So the more we can collaborate on the front end of this with our partner districts, the better.
Yeah, makes sense.
But I'm sure you won't make the decisions in a bubble, but we could decide masks for every spectator from beginning to end, but a different school district could say, as long as you're outside, it doesn't matter. So there could be some inconsistencies even for our kids when they're going to a different district.
I would fully expect it.
Yeah.
I think, the further out we go, and granted, we're limited to sectional competition, the more the section's huge. We're talking about, we don't compete in, with 50 other districts. We compete within our conference, but
40 miles away.
Tuckahoe, as an example, and you get into those areas and those communities, no different than you've seen with the reopening of their schools. There's discrepancies. Mm-hmm. There's going to be discrepancies when it comes to athletics. And what I don't want is our kids to have to face some hurdle, before they compete that they're not prepared for. Right. So we would, general rule is, to implement the higher standard here, and our kids will be prepared to adjust and adapt when they get to any other facility. But to ideally have an idea going in of what the expectations are going to be at that specific location. So that's where the athletic director plays a key role in making sure that they're proactively communicating with whoever that athletic director is for that respective school, and that we have a clear idea, and I think we know generally what it is, the 4 or 5 areas we want to know about.
Right.
What are your expectations for screening when we come in? What are our children's access to locker rooms? Have those spaces been clean? what's your protocol there? And by the way, we would expect to be able to communicate this to any team that was coming to visit here.
Well, that's the other thing. How do you enforce
Yep.
it in the other direction?
Right. So health screening, as I mentioned, spectator policy, and mask policy, and to go from there. So. Yeah, this was one it's complicated, and this is one, I was not of the group, but I was in the minority, and with all due respect to my colleagues who felt we could start athletics, but I totally understood why many districts wanted to delay, and just didn't feel that this was worth getting into. I shouldn't say worth getting into, but considering what it takes to reopen the school, that we wanted to also start up conversations around athletics and getting our kids in a position to compete, because it's just like reopening a school again.
Right.
In many ways. So I understand, and I know there was my professional organization NISCUS had a stance on it. Again, every community is facing its own unique circumstances right now. So it's something we're going to have to work through with them and with our student athletes. Just one last note, as John mentioned, how virtual learning's going. We do anticipate at some point by the end of the month checking in with all of our families, as well as our staff, just to more formally get feedback on how the start of the school year has been. The feedback thus far, informally, has been positive, constructive. A couple bumps here or there, but at the same time, we want to make sure we do a formal check-in towards the end of the month. So we can anticipate a survey. Hopefully, we haven't reached survey fatigue yet, but we do think that's a good opportunity for us to check in after we've had a few weeks of school to see how things are going both ways. And that concludes my update.
Thank you. So we're going to go into our information reports. Miss Jammin, come on down.
Good evening. Can you hear me? Am I on? Great. Good evening. So opening went well at the elementary school. I think the phase-in allowed all of our students to participate in a gradual reentry to the building and getting acclimated to the new routines, both for our in-person students and for our students who were remote. So for our remote students, it allowed us to identify families that were having difficulty signing in, troubleshoot that. We still are working with families, on individual circumstances to get everybody up and running at their ideal capacity, but making good progress with those families. It also gave us a chance to troubleshoot if we were to close at any point, and everybody were to go remote. So even our kindergarten and first graders were remote for 2 days last week, and that allowed them to sign on, practice getting into their Google Classrooms, and identify problems with individual students if they weren't able to use their login or find their password, or just work through what that looks like, especially for our K-1 or our students who are new to the district, and so didn't participate in remote learning in the spring. So I think that our students who were in person had a good chance to work through the routines of how we make sure the bathrooms stay socially distanced, and how we navigate our hallways, and how we find our outdoor classrooms, and all of those new procedures that are different for our kids this year, for our students and our teachers. So thank you so much to our teachers. They've done a ton of work over the summer and getting ready as we reopened to work with our students and our families in that way. So thank you. They've been doing a great job. And our students have been doing a great job following procedures, taking things very seriously. They're little, so they definitely need reminders, and they need supports and encouragement, but they are doing an amazing job. They really are, as they enter. Our outdoor classrooms have all been accessed, so the last 2 days, all of our kids have been eating outside for lunch and snack. They're being accessed for instruction as well. That's ramping up. We're still working on getting all of our remote students in for their mini lessons. Remember, for our first 2 2 weeks with the phase-in, we had half days. So really you were looking at an hour that you had once you went through the arrival and a morning meeting, and once you were looking at dismissal and teaching them all the routines they were engaging in. You really had a small chunk of time to get your remote learners and your class together on a remote platform. So really academics started just this past Monday. So we're working on getting those together, but kids are going outside and it's increasing each day with the amount of time that they are outdoors involved in their learning. So a definite thank you to our outdoor education committee on all of the work that they've been doing to make those spaces accessible to teachers and supportive of learning. There are now, I think, 3 different prototypes of whiteboards for teachers that are set up to trial and work on and find out what works best and get teacher feedback on what's needed for those classrooms to become even more productive. So we're off to a good start. Everybody's working really hard, and it is awesome to have our kids back in the building. As much as it's more when they're in the building, keeping them all safe and distant and all of that, I would say there was a palpable change in the anxiety level having them in the building, because it just highlights why we're here and why we're doing all of this. So it's been great. To answer a couple of questions, so remote, we're still troubleshooting, getting families what they need. You know, they're realizing their needs as they're going through, but responding to those. So tech is available, and certainly if families are having trouble and haven't reached out, let us know. But the families that we've identified as having some trouble are in progress for getting what they need. Remote instruction is underway, but we're really on day 2 of that, so I think the bumps are still to be worked out as we go through. And elementary NWEA will be pushed out starting next week, and we do have the ability to do that remotely. And since we're using it for informational purposes, you know, it's not a test that goes on their report card, and if there is an issue, we can always pull a score and have it retaken, or just pull it and not use it if it turns out it just wasn't helpful. There's no harm in having kids do it in person or at home. We're just looking for information and to assess our kids and find out where they need our help. So we're going to start that next week.
Ms. Jamin?
Yes.
I just wanted to say, as an elementary school parent, including an incoming kindergartner, your work has been just tremendous. I feel so comfortable having my children in the schools. They're having a fantastic time. It's so tight. It just feels really safe. It feels really organized. And I can tell you guys are just working so hard, and it really comes through. So thank you.
Thank you so much. The teachers are going to be very happy to get that feedback too.
Yeah, for sure.
Any other questions? All right.
Okay, Dr. Silky.
Good evening, everyone. It's so exciting to be live in person with you. It's been since February since we've had a workshop meeting together in person, so I appreciate that. And I'm also very excited that we were able to open school. Some of our regional schools are opening this week, but some are not opening until October 1st, and it's really exciting that we are able to do that for our students. And I have to point to teamwork. You know, the work of the teachers has been amazing. Your support with the phase-in, to echo what Ms. Jamin said, that really allowed us the opportunity to work out kinks and have everybody feel very comfortable on the first full day of school yesterday. So that was very exciting. For the middle school, our middle school slogan or motto is Haldane Middle School is true blue, teamwork, responsibility, understanding, and excellence. And the teachers were able to integrate the COVID teachings for hygiene, social distancing, and mask wearing into the lessons to be true blue. So that was seamless and a good way to integrate the new information that our students needed to have to keep everybody safe. And thank you to the teachers for that. Also to echo Ms. Jamin, a big shout out to Laura Eldon and Liz Campbell-Kelly and Laura O'Connell, who worked very diligently on the outdoor spaces. The middle school teachers are also using the outdoor spaces. They're using them for class, and they're using them for what's now known as our flex time, which is what lunch, recess used to be, is free time, time to eat. And I was outside with the entire 6th grade on the Hill today during flex time, and it was really nice to see kids just relaxing outside with their friends, and it gave a feeling of normalcy that we just haven't had in months, so it's really wonderful. On Thursday, we'll have our curriculum night. It will be a little bit different than it's been in the past because it's going to be virtual, and I, again, shout out to the middle school faculty we worked through several different ways that we could possibly go about having a virtual curriculum night. And what normally happens on curriculum night is that parents get to follow their child's schedule period by period. And we just couldn't make that happen in an electronic format that made sense. So what it landed on being is it's going to be a 6th grade, a 7th grade, and an 8th grade curriculum night. The benefit of that is that if you have a 6th grader and an 8th grader, you're able to attend, where that normally was something that, okay, whose are we going to go to? Or, it would have to be a choice, and at least now that's one plus side to it. So we'll have our first virtual curriculum night this Thursday, so please put that on your calendar. And just to answer some of Mr. Hedlund's questions, and I may be echoing Ms. Jamin here, our virtual students are engaged, they're logging on, and teachers report that it's difficult to have kids in the classroom and kids online, but they're making it happen, again, to their credit. The technology in the middle school is very smooth. Middle school has been one-to-one with Chromebook devices from before the pandemic began, and I think that helped us have a smooth transition with the technology. Families are used to that. Also, the technology department is doing a tremendous job. I will also say that the PTA, a subcommittee of the PTA, is working to have a parent technology help, and I know it's on their website, and we thank them. That came out of our work in the summer as the academic subcommittee stakeholders that were working on reopening school brought forward, okay, we have tech experts in the community, how could they help? And turns out there's a lot of parents that call up for things like, my internet's not working and I can't get Optimum, or my modem is, it says it needs to be restarted, what do I do? And so things like that are what the PTA parent tech help is working with, and it's I think a great relief for parents to get help from other parents. So that's happening, and that's wonderful. The NWEA measures of academic progress in reading and math are aptitude tests, and we normally administer them in the fall and the spring of each year. We decided not to administer them in the spring of last year because the crisis was very new, very fresh, and it just didn't seem appropriate to have any kind of measure at that time. So we decided that it would be a good idea to administer them now that students are back in the fall to measure what I'm doing air quotes, COVID slide. We've been hearing about, like, are there skill gaps? Where are they, if there are, and how can we address them so that we can make sure that our students haven't lost progress that they need. And as Ms. Jamin said, they're not high-stakes tests in any way, shape, or form. They're formative assessments that give teachers information about what the students are ready to learn next. So, and they can be taken at home. They're through an app. So that's all happening smoothly for both students here and at home. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Sniffen?
To try not reiterate everything that was said, I'll try to keep mine a little bit different, but kudos to the teachers for their hard work and the reopening of school. Through our phase-in at the high school, we spent a lot of time talking about the difference between the crisis in the spring, and not that we're not in crisis now, but Obviously, we were grading in a very different system and structure. Attendance wasn't being taken the same way that we're taking attendance now for our students that are virtual learners. There's a shift in expectation, and we found it very important at the high school for our students to understand that the way things were happening in the spring is very different than it's happening now. We had different expectations for our teachers than we have now, and for our students than we have now. So that phase-in allowed us the time to explain, when you're home learning now, you're expected to be there at the beginning of class. Your classroom looks different. So that was a big part of our phase-in. The other thing was, it was interesting on the days that the juniors and seniors were in, and there's arrows in the hallways, and our hallways are one direction. It was very difficult for the juniors and seniors. Habits, they just immediately, so it gave us time to do that within the phase-in at the high school. So kudos to the teachers for their work with that. One thing to note is at the high school, there's always 50% of the population at home and 50% of the population in front of you. We've had 0 issues with internet, with bandwidth, with any of that at the high school. And for the most part, our tapping into the Wi-Fi has been fine for students. There were a couple glitches at the beginning if they were bringing their own devices on campus and they hadn't logged in since they returned to campus on a device. So we had a couple things to work through right at the beginning with that, but that all seems to be going well now. The teachers, as Mary Ann stated, they're still finding their way a little bit and navigating. So if you're having a class discussion, you have 50% of the population at home, 50% are in the room, and allowing the speaking and finding that pattern for participation, they're still working through that and finding what system works best. Today, a couple teachers were trialing earpieces to see if the earpiece to the computer helped, so that was also the microphone. So if the teacher was walking a little bit, then the students could hear. But then at the same time, only the students at home were in their ear, and now the students in the class might not be hearing it, but then they were repeating it. So they're trying certain things still to find the system that works best. And I give them so much credit for really trying to figure it out and then sharing their ideas. As we talk about the reopening again and technology, I have to give a shout out also to Leah and to Melissa Seidman, who's now interning at the high school under Judy, but she's been doing a lot of PD for the teachers K-12. She is a Google certified teacher, and it's been a pleasure to have her and work with her through this. So that's the reopening. One of the nervousnesses that I was having was the allowing students to leave campus for lunch or to go home for lunch. The first 2 days, it's been very smooth. I will say most freshmen and sophomores are staying on campus. They're feeling relaxed. They're feeling comfortable. The juniors and seniors continue to leave like they always have. We have some students who are leaving, and last 2 days, everybody's been back on time, ready to go for their classes. So that seems to be going well. To Mary Ann, we as well had a committee to look at curriculum night and what we wanted that to look like. Following an 8-period day, 12 minutes in and out of classes virtually, we recognized would be very difficult to manage. What we are doing, we have always put all syllabi are posted online for every single high school course. Now, not only are the syllabi there, but there is a recording of the teacher going through the course expectations for every single class. So at any point, it'll be live on Monday. At any point, you can go see that and you can understand what the course is about. On the 24th, which is a Thursday night, there will be drop-in Zoom sessions for every teacher. So parents, if you have any questions and you'd rather have that live communication with the teacher, you can drop in to the Zoom session to ask your questions. Or of course, parents can always email teachers directly for any questions they may have. Those sessions will be set up by department. So there'll be a time slot for the English department, math, science, and social studies. Most students take one of each of those subject matters. Sometimes students may double up on math or science, but you have a half an hour to try to jump in and ask the teacher a direct question via Zoom. So that's how we're working that. The last thing, I know I'm going long tonight. The last piece is I have to give a shout out to Michelle Cordero and Jackie McGrath and their research and presentation course. They did a lot of work over the summertime to get us to be a PBS school and PBS newsroom. So our students this year will be working in hopes that their research and their news broadcasting technique they learned, their research they learned, will be featured, maybe, hopefully, on PBS. So that's obviously project-based learning at its finest, with true, real audiences to evaluate their work. So thank you to them.
Great, thank you.
That was a lot for the mask.
Thanks. Yeah, Ms. Tara Rounds.
Good evening. Can you hear me? Okay. So I think Dr. Silke mentioned teamwork in her report, and I just wanted to mention as well the work that we've done in collaboration with the facilities department as well as the health office, Nurse O'Hara, whose positions have changed so drastically over these past few months. And even in the summer, prior to our big reopening, we did have students coming in, our first students coming in for their extended school year services. We do those services one-on-one, so it was a little bit easier for us to manage over the summer and to start with that. And Nurse O'Hara was right there up at the annex or the Maple Merit Building, helping to screen those students. The facilities department was implementing those cleaning procedures and helping measure out where the desks can be over the summer. And then, of course, that started to get us ready for when we had our actual reopening. So thank you to those people who were so valuable during that time and continue to be. As we are starting the new school year, our related service providers, our special education teachers are providing, continuing to provide the support, the accommodations that our students need, both in person and remotely. Some of the things that we are working through are how to deliver related services remotely and also in person in a socially distanced way. So we're troubleshooting things like we have to create smaller groups where we used to have group services for either counseling or speech language therapy, things like that. And some of the things that they're doing to be able to have those group services are going outside, taking those groups outside and being able to do that. Another thing that we are putting in place is trying to hold group sessions with students who are both at home, remote, and in person. So letting them Zoom in and do, say they have similar goals, a speech language therapy session, so that there's that integration with students who are in both places. We've worked with, again, Tim Walsh's department was able to order the clear dividers, as well as for speech providers, the window masks, as we're trying to troubleshoot what's the best way to deliver speech language therapy, right? When we have to see students' mouths and teach them how to form words and things like that. So that's been a great assistance, and our speech language therapists are troubleshooting as we go with that as well. So that's been ongoing. I did want to mention on Superintendent's Conference Day, we did have all of our counselors meet with our teachers. This came out of our reopening task force, the subcommittee for social emotional support, and they were able to meet with all of our teachers. These were the school counselors, school social workers, psychologists, all met at the different levels with teachers to talk about how to support students as they're coming back to school. What's the best way to provide a multi-tiered system of supports where we're reconnecting everybody, right? Because everybody has gone through this crisis. And then being aware of those students who may need additional supports as well. So they talked about mindfulness activities, they talked about reconnection activities, they talked about resources, and especially they talked about taking that time with the students and not rushing right into academics, but taking that time to reconnect. So that was a big priority. And along with that, they also are providing, part of their presentation talked about self-care for our teachers so that they're taking care of themselves in this time that's stressful for them and a big change for them. And our social workers and our counselors are providing I think each level it's bi-monthly support groups. Just another chance for our teachers to come together with our clinicians and be able to share and connect and talk about, the bright spots of the day, but also talk about some of the challenges that they're having. So I thank them for offering that to our staff. Any questions?
Thank you.
Thank
Okay, thank you.
you. Mr. Walsh?
Good evening. As mentioned earlier in our walkthrough, the facilities department had a very busy and eventful summer in terms of our typical summer work of cleaning, stripping and waxing floors. We also had the task of preparing the buildings for reentry due to the pandemic, which included relocating and readjusting all furniture throughout buildings to ensure social distancing, installing a hand sanitizing stations, signage, floor markings, as well as code review of our ventilation systems, and other code reviews such as hand dryer securing, fixtures, ensuring that we had enough fixtures and social distancing at those areas. We also had a robust capital improvement program which was completed over the summer. The site improvement project which was completed included the repaving of the bell lot, the playground lot, installation of guardrails, miscellaneous fencing, as well as the swing set replacement. We replaced the kitchen equipment in the cafeteria as well as the cafeteria flooring. And not to get too ahead of ourselves, but now we're looking forward to summer of 2021. We're continuing our capital program as we're going to bid out the replacement of the elementary window replacement shortly, as well as we're continuing the design of the electrical mechanical upgrades throughout the district in anticipation of completing that work over summer 2021 as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Lots of work happening. Okay, at this time is our communication from the public. Would anybody like to communicate with us? No? Okay. Consent agenda minutes. May I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Second?
These are the minutes from our September 1st business meeting. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Consent agenda financial. May I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Second?
Any questions or comments? Thank you, School Foundation.
Yeah.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Consent agenda personnel. May I have a motion, please?
So moved. Second.
Any discussion? I believe we have one of our appointees here in the audience with us, Mr. Barry, yes?
Is here. Welcome, Mr. Barry. And soon to be congratulations.
Hi, Mr. Barry. Okay, any questions or comments?
No.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Congratulations, Mr. Barry. Welcome to the team. Unfinished business. So the Board of Education goals are here in executive content. So I guess the whole community can't see them if this is really for the board to discuss. These are based on our discussion last time around. There are 4 goals on this draft. I will start by sharing that makes me slightly uncomfortable because I'm a 2 to 3 goal, and I have a hard line with that. But John really talked me off the ledge with it because he helped me see that goals 1 and 2, specifically goals 1, supporting the district and its facilitation of instruction, and supporting the understanding and commitment to the strategic coherence plan. There's not a lot of to-dos on our agenda for that, right? It's really more, it's a little symbolic. It's about supporting the administration, but there's not like a whole list of to-dos that we have to do in those areas. There are to-dos to be done in numbers 3 and 4, policy manual and new board member onboarding process. So I became more comfortable with going to a 4-goal listing after John talked me into it a bit. So does anybody have anything they want to share about it?
So I sent you that email, and I know you responded. So I added in afterwards, after we left last week, I thought, the one thing that we're always talking about is social, emotional well-being. We're talking about how we're not entirely sure how everybody's going to come back and what their needs are going to be after the shutdown in terms of students, in terms of parents, in terms of teachers and staff. So, you know, I kind of thought, well, maybe this is really the year that we put our money where our mouth is and say, all right, every single meeting we check in and say, how's it going? What's it, you know, what do you need? You know, and really put that emotional well-being at the forefront. We always say it is, but maybe we really need to do that. And it sounds like Tara, from her report, it sounds like a lot of those things went into place without us even blinking, that everybody's really on the same page. But I just really want to be sure that this is the year that we really need to go in and say, yes, we talk about this, but we really have to.
Yeah, and in response to that, you'll notice did you get a chance to read the draft?
I did.
Yeah, so the number one goal includes now staying attuned to the social and emotional needs of students and staff, and it's the same, it's a similar language in the district goals as
Right.
well, that was added in. And, you know, Dr. Benante and I spoke about that a bit because it in a way, it's implied. I mean, I feel like it's implied, and you can tell by the administrator's reports that exactly what you just said, it's happening
Right.
On multiple levels. But it is worth saying out loud and
Right.
being really specific about, and I think that was a really good suggestion. And so I feel like goal number one encompasses that. Do you feel like it does as well, or do you feel like it needs to have more?
Well, I feel like we say it a lot over and over again, but I feel like it might need to be singled out a little bit. This year, this is the year where if we're really going to say, all right, this is a goal, I think this is the year where we say we need to keep track. And we need to be sure that we are always on track to make sure that people's social, emotional well-being is taken care of. I think this is the year that we can shine for that as long as we keep it on focus, because we always talk about it.
Yeah, absolutely. So are you comfortable with the way that goal one is, it's not, it doesn't do
I don't
it for
care if
you?
it's written, I don't care how it's written. I want to be sure we remain focused.
Okay,
Yes.
From my perspective, I don't care how it's written. I just want to make sure that we put that in there and continue to say, this is really important
keep checking
this
in
year.
on it.
Yeah.
Yes,
In
absolutely.
action, that looks like us on a regular basis addressing any concerns or questions that come up, or
Yes.
being careful to check
Adding
in
an
and
item to the agenda.
Yeah.
I'm not,
Yeah.
I guess the open question would be, who would report out on that? Would it be you? Would it be a member? Would it be Tara? Would it be, and there may be pieces that would circulate among each, and maybe I don't know.
Right,
How do we keep our finger on the pulse?
right. And I think that's got to be the goal. How to figure out how to keep our finger on the pulse, because then that will be long-term.
Do you have any comments about that, Dr. Benante?
Well, I think it's a part of the draft district goal as well. So I know Jen and I spoke about there being alignment between the board and the district on that. Specifically how I think it's, whenever we have a discussion like this, it's a good one because it's important for the administration to be clear on what indicators the board would expect us to report back on. Because social emotional well-being of staff and students is pretty broad. And what works for John and is important to John very well may be different than what works or what's important to Sean. So it's a very individualized, in my experience, thing for our people from a human resource perspective. So I think there are some broad level supports that we're being really deliberate in making sure that are in place, some of which Tara spoke to today for staff specifically, and similarly for students as well. And we certainly can highlight those for the board, but what I just want to make sure is that if there's anything more specific that wasn't mentioned tonight or that any one board member or the board as a whole has in mind, that we just have clarity on what that is moving forward. Because I agree with what Margaret says, we could be, it's very easy to talk about social emotional well-being broadly, but not drilling down necessarily into the specifics that may address any concerns or provide the board with enough information. So in turn, when you're speaking to your constituent groups, respectively, you feel like you have a level of detail necessary to speak to it. Because I see a lot that's going on, but again, I don't want to make the assumption that that's addressing for individual board members or for the board as a whole what your questions may be. So if there's anything specifically beyond what we discussed tonight that you'd like to point to as a means for us to report back on, and it doesn't have to happen tonight, it can happen in between meetings because you may want to process that for a bit, that's most welcome.
Yeah, and I think that, my experience has been that the administrators are really happy to answer any of our questions, either in the moment or ahead of time. So if, just like Dr. Benante said, if there's something coming up for any of us specifically to let Dr. Benante know, or the administrator specifically and Dr. Benante know, a question you might want an answer to, but I also think that they're probably all hearing us loud and clear right now and know that if it's a board goal and a district goal, and that includes social emotional in the wording, that we want to stay abreast of what's going on and that they'll make an effort to
Well, I was just
report.
thinking about, as we think about the workshop topics for the year, I think in most all of them, except for potentially the technology update, I think there's an opportunity for the individual who's leading that workshop to put as a bullet point or as a theme within the broader, whether it's curriculum or special education or middle school detail reports, like what's a social emotional thread, through thread.
Tech could do that too. That absolutely could
maybe,
overlevel.
maybe tech is in there as well, but maybe if this is how we action on what our idea is, not that we're going to establish a regular piece on the agenda or designate somebody to talk about it every time, but that we ask in the applicable workshop topics, there's a thought to what's a social emotional
Right.
element.
Yeah.
Maybe that's a good way to do it.
Yeah,
Right.
agreed.
If I could add one more thing, Jen,
Please.
just as an example.
Yeah.
Of a situation we've encountered leading up to the start of the school year. I think we all sensed on a leadership level of anxiety that many of our staff were having with respect to how our ventilation system worked. And it was in the media. There was a lot being written about the importance of examining and reviewing ventilation systems when it comes to the spread of this virus. And I know Tim, as you heard, spent a lot of time examining how our ventilation system worked and making the appropriate accommodations or shifts as recommended. To me, that's a highly technical issue, but speaks directly to considering the emotional well-being of our staff. I was meeting with the teacher the other day who clearly had just concerns about the portable hand sanitizer stations, and would feel better if it was positioned in a different spot. We took care of it. So sometimes it's not, necessarily the issue that you would think of the support group, if you will, or such structures that come immediately to mind. It's also taking into consideration the very technical issues and space accommodations that we're making to prepare our students and our staff to come into school each day. So that's just what I speak to when it's a far-reaching component, and what for one person may be eliciting anxiety or concern, for another may not even be a question. So that's where that level of specificity for us is important. And I think as you have those questions, to please bring them forward, because my experience thus far has been that more often than not, unless we've completely missed something, which I don't think we have, we're taking all of those concerns into consideration and trying to put the appropriate supports in place.
Okay, so are there any more specific comments about this goals draft? It's also here, if anybody has anything specific about it in between now and next meeting. We'll look to adopt these at the next meeting. So if anybody wants changes made or suggestions, edits, speak up between now and next meeting. Yeah?
Thank you.
And then the district goals are here as well, and Dr. Benante, I'll let you speak to them. I don't think they've changed much.
I don't believe they have, but I'm also realizing in my printout, I was joking about this in the office, how I'm a little old school and I still like to bring paper copies to things, to our meetings. And I'm seeing that I have duplicates of the board goals, and I don't have my district goal draft in front of me. Thank you. Yes, that looks more familiar. Thank you, Jen.
There's a cracked screen and crumbs all over that.
Totally
Is that
ignoring
freaking you out?
your setup here.
Just totally ignore it.
You're in need of a
I know.
wipe
It's,
here.
I know. It's making me anxious.
So the first goal is very consistent with the board's goal in that area. Our primary focus this year is facilitating continuity of instruction for both the students who are on campus and those who are at home through this crisis, and also remaining attuned to the social emotional needs of both our students and our staff that may manifest over the course of the school year. And we do anticipate that there's going to be ebbs and flows to that over the course of the year. So I think we've spoken enough about that. We don't want to lose sight that this is our first year within a new coherence planning framework. And while this is an incredibly unique circumstance to attempt to launch the beginning of a coherence plan, we feel a responsibility to make sure that we do. We have put some things on hold for September just to allow our staff and our students to settle in. But we do see October as the necessary beginning of launching that work. So we're looking to make sure that we're saturating the community as best we can in our new framework, which would include the district's missions, values, and beliefs, as well as the Haldane essentials for this year. There are some more practical elements, just to put us in a greater state of readiness, that are also going to be on the docket for this year behind the scenes, and we'll have time to talk more about those as we get into the school year. And then the third goal is, at the request of the board, at the conclusion of my evaluation last year, I anticipate that this will be a goal for the foreseeable future, which really is related to our strategic coherence plan because it came out of that as well. But I think we had identified this as a need beforehand, I really should say, which is making sure we're committed to our structure of continuous program review in all program areas, K through 12. Trying to create a clear line of sight between what our students are experiencing in kindergarten all the way through high school, and making sure that we're truly building upon their experience each year and reviewing our systems and our processes that enable that or that get in the way of that each year. So that goal remains as it has for the last 2 years.
Take back your crumbs.
So get that out of my face. I can't. Okay, great. So I think both of our goals drafts will hopefully turn into final drafts next meeting. Okay, so if anybody has questions, comments, anything, get them to Dr. Benante and I. Okay? Okay. Going into the CSE, CPSE recommendations. May I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Ms. Platt.
Be it resolved that, upon the recommendation of the Superintendent of Schools, the Board of Education hereby approves the recommendations of the Committees on Special Education and Preschool Special Education as presented.
Sorry, I did that in the wrong order. Usually you read it, and then I say that. So I'm going to now say it in the correct order. May I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, Dr. Benante, I'll turn this one over to you.
As we discussed during our last meeting, and as it relates to, you have my district goals. I think it's district goal number 1. We are recommending the creation of 2 additional elementary teacher positions to support our remote learners at the K-3 level specifically over the course of this school year, or at least for the foreseeable future. And this recommendation is to create the 2 positions. And we have posted these positions because we discussed this during our last meeting, so thank you for that. It has allowed us to get ahead of it a little bit. But once they're now created, we can begin interviewing candidates. And my hope would be to appoint 2 individuals to these positions as a means of supporting, again, our remote learners, which, by way, is supporting our staff as well at our next meeting.
Yeah, and I think what you were going to say, Dr. Benante, is that this is one of those examples of how do we support our staff's mental health, right?
Correct.
It is, clearly, it's a challenge for any teacher to be remote learning and in-person learning at the same time. But to do it at the super primary grades is additionally challenging. And these positions will help our teachers. They'll facilitate almost like co-teaching environments, correct? So it's going to be great for our students, but it'll also be great for our staff.
And just one last note in terms of the finances, as Ann had reported back a couple of meetings ago, I'll say, it was probably a month ago, and discussed the balance forward we had, which we were positioned from last school year. We were positioning those monies as somewhat of a COVID relief fund. We had put some of that into facilities upgrades and needs through the summer. We had some other recommendations that were smaller in nature, and I think we had an outstanding balance of somewhere $200,000+. I said we would spend that money pretty quickly, and that the bulk of that will now go towards the funding of these two positions. There is still some funding remaining with that, but this is what we have in mind.
Okay, so I'll turn it over to Ms. Platt.
I have a quick question. Are these permanent? So we have, okay, how's this work?
So we're hiring them as probationary employees.
Okay.
With the notion, though, that, and I would be candid with any candidate, that these are
Yeah.
short-term in
Yep.
nature.
Okay, intentionally short-term in nature.
Correct. So I would envision making a recommendation at the end of the school year.
Yep.
My hope certainly is that we are now post-pandemic at that point, or
Yeah.
certainly seeing our way now out of it, to eliminate these two positions.
Okay.
So they are short-term.
Okay, great. So I just think that the through thread from last spring when we were talking about tax levy and the carryover over the 4% to enable funding COVID-related. This is where we are.
Correct.
This is not an expectation at this point. It will sit with us while we are in COVID. Hopefully, we will be done with that at the end of this year. Great. Good.
Otherwise, we would have to make an immediate recommendation for next year's budget development to increase our budget by these two positions. Because remember, this is from the funding that we're carrying in excess fund balance.
Great. Thank you.
Yep.
And the
Good question.
And the 20% that's being held back, do we know where that is? And so we don't know where that grant is in the grand scheme of things, but that's not going to affect this particular, or will it?
No, it won't. We're okay there. We're in a unique position because of the relative health of our fund balance, but also we are not as dependent on state aid as other districts in the immediate future. I don't want us to lose sight of that issue, though. And the longer we go into this school year, the more significant that lack of funding will be. We'll be fine for this school year, but it can become a significant issue as we begin budgeting for next school year.
Right.
Assuming that if we don't get it now, we're at that starting point for next year's budget as well.
Right. And the planner that you are will be starting that in 8 weeks.
Correct. If not already.
Right.
But it's an issue, Margaret, you're astute to bring it up, that you're going to see, if you haven't already, districts beginning, in particular those districts that are more state aid dependent, making mid-year budget cuts to account for that loss of revenue. So we're at about 10% of our budget is driven by state aid, whereas there's other districts that it's 50, 60%. So, I was just speaking to my colleagues about this, and it ranges, and unfortunately it ranges by demographics. It's the districts that are a little generally more upper middle class communities are not as impacted as those that are not. So, but it will impact us over the long term if it's not resolved.
But for this particular
We should
instance
be
right
fine.
here, we're good.
Yes, yes.
Okay, Ms. Platt.
Be it resolved that, upon the recommendation of the Superintendent of Schools, the Board of Education hereby approves the creation of 2 additional elementary teachers for purposes of providing additional support to students through the COVID-19 pandemic.
May I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Second?
Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, our building level school emergency response plan. Ms. Platt.
Be it resolved that, upon the recommendation of the Superintendent of Schools, the Board of Education hereby approves the Haldane Central School District building-level school emergency response plans for 2020-2021.
May I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Second?
Dr. Benante, do you have anything you'd like to share with us about this?
Just a note of appreciation to our principals in working with their building emergency response teams through the summer while we had a lot of other things going on, but to make sure that our plans were thoroughly reviewed and up to date. We also worked closely with Alteris, our school security consultant, in the creation or the revision of these plans. These have to be submitted to New York State, which we will do pending your approval, and we'll then begin the cycle of our work with Alteris this school year, our review of building level processes. Remember, Alteris had done an audit of our processes 2 years ago when we brought them on, and each year we tackle a chunk of their audit recommendations, and we'll continue to do so this year.
Great. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
District committee charges. Ms. Platt.
Be it resolved that, upon the recommendation of the Superintendent of Schools, the Board of Education hereby reauthorizes the charges to the following district committees for 2020-2021: Buildings and Grounds, Code of Conduct, Health and Safety, Technology, and Wellness.
May I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Second?
Any discussion? Margaret, you brought up,
I
good
noticed that on the
comment.
code of conduct that it didn't have a student listed. And I was just wondering if that was going to be, if that was a deliberate choice or an oversight, because we did used to have a student.
Correct. And speaking with Julia, we would agree that a student representative would be helpful to have on the Code of Conduct Committee. So the only recommendation I would make is in adopting the charges, it's with the note that we will add a student representative to the Code of Conduct Committee. We don't currently have one listed, so it would be with that modification on there. And it seems like for the past couple of years, we haven't had a student rep, but Julia and I discussed and agreed it would be helpful to have one.
Yeah, we haven't had one in a while,
Sure.
but I think it was always on
No, I
there.
think it's a good
that we
recommendation.
should have.
yeah. Good catch, Margaret. Okay, all those in favor? Aye. Okay, workshop topics. This is just a discussion. There is a list of our topics from last year, list of our topics, a draft suggestion for this year. It does follow a similar model to last year. Anything sticking out to anybody as something they would like changed, added, taken away? So far, so good. You know, these are a little fluid, right? We make little shifts along the way, and I think that we've talked about asking for certain things throughout these workshop topics. We talked a little bit about at our retreat. We've talked a little bit about it tonight. So I think there's room to craft these as we need to. But these are the general topics, which I think make a lot of sense. There's some of these that we're required to do that are in there. And I like the idea of keeping a kind of a rhythm to it, you know, so that every year we are doing that, a revisit. So are these looking good to everybody?
Yes.
Yeah?
Good.
Do we need to approve these? Not tonight,
I
but
don't think tonight, but I
Maybe
would put them
next-
on for the next one,
Yep.
just to leave some space for additional
Good.
input if there is any. before our
great.
next meeting.
So just like the district goals, if there's anything that comes to mind between now and next meeting, reach out, and we'll look to approve them at our next meeting. Okay, any further communication from the public at this time? Going once, going twice? Okay, board committee reports. These are our two standing committee update reports, which is good practice. I don't actually think there are an update for either. But number one, policy committee update. We have scheduled, the policy committee has scheduled its first meeting of the year.
Yeah.
To get back on the horse. So that will be, I think, next week. So that's coming. And the Westchester Putnam School Boards Association, our first meeting is next week as well. So, we're continuing in motion. I did send you guys all an email in case anybody is available. There's a advocacy meeting I think it's next week, if anybody's able to attend. As Dr. Benante has been talking to us about, and we've been talking about as a group, the state aid business is serious. It will require us to advocate, I'm sure, at some point as a group with our colleagues. I think it will be the topic of the year for us as school governance teams. So I think the more we can all stay connected to it, the better. So I leave that out there in case anyone's available. And I'll keep sending you guys the information because they'll send reports on the meetings even if we can't go. Okay, board reflections. Anybody have anything they'd like to share?
I will. My son is one of the kids who is a virtual learner and a young virtual learner at that. So he requires a considerable amount of support from mom and dad. And we're 2 days into what the sort of getting a sense of what that full experience is going to be. And I can confirm that it's very different than it was in the spring. But so far, I'm really, two things. One, I'm very appreciative of the amount of synchronous experience that is there. So there's lots of opportunity to be social, and I think all the kids feel involved. And I get a sense of the kids at home and the kids in the classroom having the opportunity to create some sort of relationship in a really positive way, which I'm really encouraged by. But I'm also just, as I was present in the spring, to the vulnerable position that our staff is in this. And I just want to acknowledge that, you have a lot of parents' eyes on your job and in your work. And it's a tremendous privilege for us as parents to be able to participate in that and see what's happening. I just know that it's to be watched is another daunting level. And it's particularly when it's in your classroom. So, and I just want to acknowledge that it's a burden that all of our teachers are taking on that I really appreciate, and that I think many parents, myself included, I just want to celebrate all of our teachers for, I think, really rising to the challenge so far, and I thank you.
Nice, thank you.
I would just throw out a couple things. One, thank you for the walkthrough, Tim, earlier, but I did want to do I said this to Tim, but I wanted to do a public shout out for all the cleaning staff and maintenance staff who a lot of people don't work with or see as often. Like, the added burden of making sure that the facilities are clean is phenomenal. If you walk around, you see the checklists around basically on every surface on one thing. Great for them. Two, I noticed that on yesterday, today only Tuesday, was the first time we had both children out of the house, separated from us for more than an hour since March. And I was like, oh my God, this is crazy. So congratulations to
you.
It was fine. It was great. Congratulations for the school. And three, I'm going to do a little practice what I preach. I would love to know, we talked a little bit about NWEAs as a general sort of place and time. It'd be great if we can put a tickler for when those come back in, and there's sort of a sense of, okay, where are we starting the year, to hear a little bit about that from you or the various administrators to start us off on where are we with student progress, so especially in this weird year. So thank you.
Yeah, Dr. Silke had, so on Monday was my birthday, and I saw Dr.
Saturday was
Silke.
my birthday.
Yeah, yesterday.
We're all Virgos.
And I said to Marianne, I said, today's the best birthday present ever. And then I literally cartwheeled down the hill. I'm not even kidding.
Phenomenal.
So it was a great day, John. I felt you.
Yep.
proud
Yeah.
of you.
I can't wait for my birthday.
I do have one question, more of a question than a reflection. Are we going to have a student representative on the board this year?
We were just
Have
talking
we-
about that.
have we-
Yes, we are. And I would anticipate at the next meeting, we will have our student, although we haven't announced who that student is yet.
Fantastic.
Bear with us.
All right, I just wanted to check and make sure,
Yeah,
because
great.
we've had really good students in the past.
We have.
Yeah,
Mrs. Sniffen is excellent at recruiting them.
she's on it.
As long
Gets us
as
only
height
the
is
very
not a
best.
consideration. It seems to have been a consideration in the past. All right.
Okay, Dr. Benante, do you have anything you'd like to share?
No further remarks. Thank you.
Okay. Then I'd like to make a motion to adjourn. May I have a second, please?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.